Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 135 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite an interesting assortment of animals, which I'm quite keen to get into. A lot of little invertebrates, but we've got a couple mammals and a reptile and a bird, which is pretty cool. Really excited to get stuck into this one. So we're going to be starting off today. This first one was done by Leaf and Phonetic. So Leaf coded it, Phonetic made it. We've got here the Albinia olive wing. So let's have a look at one of these little guys. So let's have a look at the camera. Look at this very pretty little guy. There's one in the light. This one's perfect. So the Olivia olive wing, or Nerissa obscura, you say that, Obscurus, is a species of butterfly from the family Nymphalidae and is found in Colombia down to the Guianas from the mouth of the Amazon to south to central Brazil and the Mato Grosso in Brazil and even in northern Argentina. So quite a wide range. Typically, the length of the wings is about 25 to 40 millimeters for males and about 26 to 41 for females, so the females are slightly bigger. Adults of the main subspecies with nominate subspecies are on the wing from January through July to November. Adults of the other subspecies Panventa are on the wing year-round, but mainly from June to October. And adults of the species subspecies Libstroidae are on the wing year-round and with no observed peaks. So there's three different subspecies. The nominate subspecies, which is most likely the one here, comes from Guianas and Venezuela. Venturva comes from Brazil and in Bolivia. And Lizardae comes from Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil. So you can see that. And really interesting, you can see they've got a very unusual, as they're one of the few animals that actually have blue pigment. And most other species, like, blue morphos, mainly any of the animals that have blue colors actually just reflect light reflect light to reflect blue, but these guys actually have it's called coherent scattering, but these guys actually have a blue pigment, and it seems they get it from the pigment called terebinum, which is interesting, and it comes also provides me for a few other species, and other butterflies do use it, but things like blue morphos, they tend to use the scattering to more like the scales in their on their wings to grab it. But yeah, really cool. Great mod done by Leaf and Phonetic. So next up, we've got another one done by Leaf and Phonetic. We're going over here. We've got something a little bit bigger, which I'm excited to talk about. We have got the Atlas Moth. So let's have a look at Atlas Moth. Well, look at you. Look at this pretty guy. I love these moths. So Atlas Moths, very interesting. So Atlanticus atlas. They're a large moth that is endemic to the forests of Asia, and are quite famous because they're one of the largest species of Lepidopteran, which is the group that includes, of course, most butterflies and moths. We'll have a look at one that's okay. We want one that's not going to fly around, and in good light. Oh, they look good. Okay, so as I mentioned, they're one of the largest types of butterflies and moths, with a wingspan that measures about 24 centimeters, or about 9.9 inches, and a wing surface about 160 centimeters squared, or about 25 inches squared. And it's only surpassed by the white witch and another similar species in the same genus in wing surface area, and by the Hercules moth. So it is not the biggest, but it's up there. There's a few that are like a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, but it's kind of one of the biggest ones all around. And as in most silk moths, the females are typically much larger and heavier than the females, with males having broader antennae. So they come into life, we'll go with their life cycle. So they come to life in small spherical eggs that are about 2.5 millimeters in diameter, born on the undersides of leaves. Then after 2 weeks, the dusty green caterpillars will hatch from the eggshell and forage on whatever trees like citrus and cinnamon. And they grow to about 11 centimeters long, or about 4.5 inches in length, and approximately 2.5 centimeters in thickness. And they have a white, waxy, fleshy spines along their back, which actually becomes a lot more prominent the more instars you go. And the last abdominate segment between the prolegs, they have like a large green spot. And then once they're finished growing, once they reach that 11 centimeters, they will pupate. They'll go into a papery cocoon, and then come out as adult moths. And you can see adult moths are actually quite weak, unsteady flyers, and to conserve energy, they usually rest during the day and fly at night. And they also lack fully formed mouth parts, so basically they subsist on the fat that they've already made during their larval stage. And they typically only live for a few days because the adult stage is typically only around to look for a mate. And they're most abundant. They can be found throughout the year, but most abundant between November and January. So the females release pheromones from the end of their abdomen to attract a mate, and females will stay in their discarded cocoons and use those chemoreceptors to find each other. And the body is quite small compared to its wings, and you can see the underside is a little bit paler as well, but you can see the top's got really, really bright colours. Looks really, really interesting. They also have a very short vestigial proboscis, and they do not eat once they've emerged from the cocoon, relying only on that fat storage. And each flight takes a valuable energy, which can take days off their short life. So they typically have a short lifespan of only 1 to 2 weeks, and they conserve energy by flying as little as possible. But as I mentioned, they are found around the dry tropical forests and secondary forests and scrublands of Southeast Asia. They can be found Southeast Asia, South Asia, East Asia, and including Borneo as well, so quite a wide range as well. They get the name Atlas moth because it comes from Atlas, the Greek mythology, because he's quite big, he's a titan. And Cantonese means, Hong Kong and Cantonese, it means snake-head moth, as a kind of head kind of looks like a snake. And in India, they're actually cultivated for their silk in a non-commercial capacity. Unlike silk that's actually produced from the domestic silk moth, which is typically where most things come from, it tends to comes out in broken strands, so it's less desirable. But there's some people that makes it could be like used as a substitute for common silks, things like that. But it's a lot of research, but it's not commercially viable yet. But yeah, really, really interesting. I do love a nice big Atlas moth, also done by Leaf and Phonetic. So we're going to move on to another one. We got Scott and Leaf coming back. Got another really, really cool tarantula. But this is really interesting. So this is a new species. It's actually just been described. So it's a new genus that was actually found inside a bamboo plume in the from Mae To Tak province in Thailand. And it's actually the first genus of tarantula that shows a surprising specialization that living within bamboo stalks. And the Babu culm tarantula, or Tuscus barbus, was found in Thailand by Jocho Sipawat. Forgive me for that pronunciation. But he's a wildlife YouTuber from Thailand and actually discovered it, so that's really, really cool. And you think that's pretty weird for an animal, but considering how common bamboo is in Asia, it's a great place to hide. That's why there's animals that specialize in eating baboons, like pandas. You'd think, oh, that's silly, but it's so abundant. Why wouldn't you take advantage of it? But yeah, these guys are really interesting as they've made a specialization for living in bamboo, and it actually is quite. Jocho is actually quite a prominent YouTuber as well. He's got about 2.4 million subscribers, and along with archaeologists like Mr. Chalwat Sosang Choti and Dr. Narem Chokpunyang. Forgive me for pronunciation, but they describe this new genus as well. And in general, typically they tend to be tarantulas tend to be either arboreal or terrestrial in Southeast Asia. But now they haven't found this one that lives in that specific bamboo, which is really, really weird. It was discovered in the stalks of giant baboons, stalks, which is really interesting. And they typically will try and find holes, typically on dead ones, and it can be their little hideout, which is really, really interesting. And Tachinus is named from his own genus, and actually is the first genus named of tarantula described in since 1917. So it's been 104 years since the last one was named. So it's discovered new species. That's really, really cool, and a little bit of history. So that's a really, really cool little bit of history with these guys. Definitely love these little guys. Love little tarantulas, little friends. Really, really cool. It shows how even just regular people can have a big impact on science. And these YouTubers, YouTubers describing new species, that's almost unheard of. It's the first instance of it. But next up, we've got Scott and Leaf, who did a wonderful job with that. Next up, we've got Scott. Again, not Scott, Norwaller. So Norwaller has made us a Madagascar hissing cockroach. Let's see if we can find one that's not in... There we are. In the light. We need one in the light. Oh, there's the one there. Look at this friend. So this is a Madagascar hissing cockroach. Also just known as hissing cockroaches or just hisses. They're actually one of the largest species of cockroach in the world. They reach about 5 to 7 centimeters, or about 2 to 3 inches in maturity. And due to their name, they are native to Madagascar, which is off the African mainland, and can commonly be found in rotting logs. There's actually one of some 20 species of large hissing roaches in Madagascar, and some of many which can be kept as pets, but there are a few species. So how they do this hissing is really interesting. So they're characterized by the hissing sound, which sounds a lot like a rattlesnake hiss. So how they're able to do this, the mainly way they do this is to scare off predators, and how they do it is that they force air throughout their spiracles, which is the holes that most insects use to breathe on the sides of their body. So they just push air out of it, and mainly those located on the abdomen, where there's all those spiracles can be found along their body as well. And the only member of cockroach that can actually make these sounds, compared to crickets, they use stridulation, but these guys will often use just much more, just pushing air out of their spiracles and just making these sounds. And they actually have three distinct hisses. So there's a disturbance hiss, like "Hey, leave me alone." There's a female attracting hiss, so it's like "Hey, look at me, I'm a woman." And then you have your aggressive or fighting hisses, which is very interesting as well. And only males will use the female attracted hiss and the frightening hitch, and the latest used when challenged by other males. So it'd be like, "Hey, you're gonna mess with me." But yeah, they're quite popular in culture. In most cockroaches in movies, these are the cockroaches you'd see. There've been movies like Starship Troopers, Dalmatian Alley for like the 70s, Fear Factor, Days and Our Lives, Men in Black. A lot of those big movies, when there's anything to do with cockroaches in movies, it's most likely Madagascar hissing cockroaches, because they're common in the pet trade and they're quite big and, look kind of scary looking, but they're actually rather sweet. They can be kept as exotic pets. They don't need a lot of stuff. They require a small area for them to hide, and then need warmth as well. So they typically kept in room temperature, right? But you made it a little bit warm. People sometimes keep them either in boxes or even fish tanks with petroleum jelly around the edges so they can't climb out, and can live on fruits and live on fresh vegetables, even though pellet food and even like dog food they can live on. And there are some restrictions in some places because they could become invasive, especially in places like Florida, but other places there's not many restrictions because if they got out they'd probably die in the winters anyway. But yeah, really, really cool guy. Love that Narwhalo gave us another lovely little cockroach. I love these guys. Sissy says they're so common in the pet trade. Look at how cute he is. Really, really awesome. Definitely a big fan. So, we are now moving on to our first exhibit animal. This one was also done by Leaf and Phonetic, habitat animal. We've got the gopher tortoise, so we're going for a good time. So the gopher tortoise is a species of tortoise within the family Tortoidae, and is native to the southeastern United States. And they're quite an important species in the ecosystems that we live in, as we'll get into. But they're sadly considered vulnerable, but in some places they're even considered endangered. So in terms of description, they're very similar to most other species of tortoises, and they have front legs that are scaled to protect them while burrowing, and they have a darker brown to grey-black colour overall with a yellow plastron. And the gular projection you can see is evident there. So there is some sexual dimorphism. So typically males will have a convex or concave plastron, so that goes in. Females will have a flat. So that basically that allows the males to mount the female. That's pretty much a thing in all tortoises. Males pretty much have this constant suck-in belly because they need to climb on top of the female. And they're quite typically also the gular projections in male because they use it a lot, particularly like fencing. It's saying that they use antlers on a deer. They will use it to push around each other. Typically, the gular projections of males are longer than females. Typical size for these guys is about 6 to 11 inches, or about 50 to 28 centimeters, with a maximum of about 16 inches, or about 41 centimeters. And the carapace is typically at least twice as long as it is high, and average body masses is about 4 kilograms, but sometimes they can range from about 2 to 6 kilograms. In size are about between 8 pounds or 4 to 13 pounds. So quite decent sized. Gopher tortoises, like other tortoises, they're herbivores and opportunistic grazers as well. They've been known to feed over 300 species of plant, like regular glasswort, legumes, things like that. Pretty much eat everything. They'll also be known to eat mushrooms and fruits such as blackberries and gopher apples. Also, a small portion of their diet could also be like lichens, carrion, bones, insects, and feces sometimes. But typically those are more commonly eaten by females when they're about to nest, before and after, to kind of get those nutrients and more protein. But typically they are mostly herbivores. So in terms of lifespan as well, they're quite long lived. They can live for about 40 years, live more than 40 years. A current specimen, Gus, is the oldest one in the world. He is about 101. And he's been living in captivity in the Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History for 75 years as of 2018. And it's believed he hatched between 1920 and 25. So the oldest one verified is 75 to 78 years old. And then they reach their maturity at about 10 to 15 years of age when their shells are about 9 inches or 23 centimeters long. The male tortoises about 9 to 12, and females take up to 10 to 21 years to reach maturity. And maturation times vary a lot based on locality, and they tend to be solitary and making their own burrows. So, in terms of reproduction, they do have courtship rituals, and during the mating season, females only produce one clutch between April and November and lay between 1 to 25 eggs and then incubate them for about 70 to 100 days. The sex of other species is determined by the temperature where the nest is. So if it's over 30 degrees Celsius, you will get female. If it's below, then it's males. And incubation lasts for about 80 days to 90 days in Florida, 210 days in South Carolina. And then the eggs will stay in the uterus of the female for about 60 days until she lays them. And then gopher tortoises will typically mate throughout February through September, with a peak with May to June, and may lay as many as 3 to 14 eggs. Clutches, it depends on their body size. And about 90% of clutches actually may be destroyed by armadillos and foxes and skunks and alligators, and about 6% of babies are expected to live one more year or more. But that's the path of the course for tortoises. They typically, not many of them make it to adulthood, but the few that do, they make so many babies, they kind of manage to make it up. Yeah, that's typical for them. But typically, they are solitary. But they do have more social behaviors, so they can live in colonies, and they've been actually suggested living in colonies similar to prairie dogs. And the distribution and proximity of these burrows might be a consequence of their social relationships. So they are considered, small solitary, but they do have some sort of friendships and things like that, a little bit more social than we give them credit for. And female gopher tortoises will actually generally do not relocate once they've moved into a colony, and larger males usually have their burrows adjacent to females in the spring. And they've been found that males will travel up to 500 meters to visit females in their burrows, so they definitely walk a big distance. So what's really interesting as well, gopher tortoises, how they got their name, is that in like other tortoises in their genus, they are known for digging, and they've been known to make very deep burrows. So they spend 80% of their time digging. On average, these burrows can be about 15 feet or about 4 meters deep, and about 6.5 feet or 2 meters, 4 meters long, 2 meters deep, and can extend up to 15 meters and about 3 meters deep. So they're quite deep burrows. And it varies a lot depending on the water table, the type of sand, things like that. And in these burrows, they can often be protected by cold summer heat, winter cold, fire, and pit. It basically just creates a little cave for them to escape the extremes of the environment. And the burrows are quite especially common in low-leaf pine savannas, where they're primary grazers. And during breeding season, they do have a small home range, but they will dig several burrows around their areas. And they typically live in a range of about 4 acres, so they'll typically hang out and try and keep that. But yeah, very interestingly, we'll talk about their conservation concerns. So historically, they were considered threatened, but there's lots of conservation issues and lots of conservation efforts to protect them for part of the reason, because they are considered a keystone species. So they actually are really, really important because of their burrows. So because they make burrows there's been observed about 350 to 400 different species actually using the burrows of gopher tortoises as temporary or permanent refuges. So species like indigos, gopher frogs, indigo snakes, small invertebrates, and burrowing owls have been observed living inside burrows. And some other species have gone in them, like in the event of a fire and things like that. So they're really, really important to the ecosystems they're found in. That's why they're considered a keystone species. And that's why there's a lot of conservation work, like kind of breeding them, making warnings about them. But there's sadly a lot of conservation issues they face. Habitat conversion's a big one. As urban areas, habitat has been converted to urban areas, things like that. But also there's been, obviously, efforts to protect them as well. Threats such as natural disasters have been a big issue. Human predation, people kind of, especially during the Great Depression, they were hunted up by people and eaten. But now they're pretty much considered like no open season. They are considered a game species, but not many people eat them. They can now be can be kept as pets. which is cool. They seem to be good pets, but got to be careful. Climate change is another big issue, like habitat fragmentation, extreme weather. Uh, Also, with a lot of other species of turtles and tortoises as well, the changing temperatures will mean the population will become more skewed to one or another sex. So you might have more males or females. So that means that the population's out of whack. Urbanization with habitat loss and habitat fragmentation and diseases have been issues. But luckily, because they're so important to the ecosystems they live in, especially for like longleaf forest conservation. There's been lots of reintroductions and reforestation efforts that require golf for tortoises, and there's been releases and captive breeding to try and help their population. And they're mostly listed as protected, and though they're considered vulnerable, they are doing better. But there is issues I mentioned, like fire ants is also an issue as they kill tortoise eggs. There needs to be some controls, but with some help, these guys could do much better, and they're really important for the ecosystem. So they're definitely an animal worth putting effort to saving. So another really awesome mod by Leaf and Fnatic. So next up, we're going to have a look at another updated mod. I'm not going to go too much about these guys because I've talked about American black bears over and over again. But we have got this one is done by Leaf and no, Genora Pizza, Leaf, who did a Glacier Bear skin, Gaboy, who remade it as well, and Doc589, who made the Tylosaurus, actually did the kind of white skin here, which is really, really cool. So this has been another big mod that's been constantly updated. So American black bears, also just known as black bears, they're a species of bear only found in North America, and the smallest and most widely distributed bear in North America. And diets will vary from season to season. So it's believed these guys are endemic to North America. They split from Asian black bears about 5 million years ago, so the end of the, or pretty much like the end of the Miocene, beginning of the Pliocene, and that's where they lived in America. And they would have lived with historically like short-faced bears and Florida spectacled bears, so there would have been quite a few bears in America. But yeah, there are a few different subspecies. However, there's been traditionally about 16 different subspecies recognized. However, recent genetic studies suggest that they're not really subspecies, they're all just like populations or just color morphs, especially with these like lighter bears like the cinnamon bear, the cinnamon bear or the glacier bear or the chemode bear or the spirit bears, those things like that. They seem to be potentially just different populations and different color morphs and not different distinct subspecies, but that's kind of what they considered still traditionally. But these guys have quite a wide range. Historically, they used to live pretty much all across America's forested areas, but they actually currently inhabit most of their original range of in Canada, so like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, things like that, Prince Edward Islands. They don't live there anymore. But the Canadian population is estimated to be just under 500,000 bears, which is pretty interesting. And the current range in the United States is throughout most of the Northeast and the Appalachian Mountains and can be found in Alaska as well. However, it's become increasingly fragmented because of people. And they have been extirpated from a lot of areas, but they are starting to come back in some areas such as Ohio, Illinois, and in Indiana, things like that. And also there's populations in Florida, like the Florida bear. And we have lots of studies into that. In terms of habitat, they tend to like habitats pretty generalist, but they like areas with like large amounts of vegetation and large quality of eating material and things like that. And it seems that they may have actually evolved. This actually may have been their preference for woodlands because of bears such as the grizzly bear and the giant short-faced bear, which were larger, more aggressive species that took over these habitats, and other large predators like Smilodon and American lions. So they kind of liked the forests more. And most contiguous areas of the United States can be found in heavily vegetated areas, typically like southwestern United States, Appalachian Mountains, the southwest as well. And just like areas with a dense forest canopy. And in terms of size, these guys vary a little bit. Typical size is about 120 to 200 centimeters in length, or about 47 to 79 inches in head to body length, and about 70 to 105 centimeters, or about 24 inches in shoulder height. The smallest bear species in North America, but large males can exceed sizes of other bears, except in brown and polar bears, which are also in America. But yeah, they're also really interesting as well. They're highly dexterous. They've got narrow muzzles that allow them to get into things. They've got big claws and they can be quite strong and dig into things, and highly dexterous. So they can pull rocks around and go around searching for food. Weight tends to vary a lot during age and sex. An adult male typically weighs between 57 and 250 kilograms, or about 126 to 551 pounds. Where is he? There, yeah. While females are typically between 41 and 170 kilograms, or about 90 to 375 pounds. So there's a lot of variation there. And as I mentioned, the pelts, there are color variations. Like, you have the blonde bears, the spirit bears, or your brown bears. It's not confusing at all, but you also have some that have like this pseudo moon shape as well. There's lots of variation. That's part of the reason why there's so many subspecies, but it turns out probably most likely just different variations, things like that. In terms of ecology, they've got really keen sense of smell, strong swimmers, and they are the most habitually boreal of like most of the bears, so they tend to be quite good climbers, and they do quite well around human habitation as well. They're good at scavenging people's food. We'll have a look at one over here. So you're completely just pure black, even though you got some scars on you. Really, really cool. They're to be territorial and non-gregarious by nature, but if there's a lot of food in an area, they will hang around together. They mark their territories by rubbing their bodies against trees and things like that, and they can have quite large ranges, but there's lots of variation. Some can be as small as 13 kilometers, or about 5 square miles, to over 2,600 kilometers, or about 1,000 square miles, depending. And very vocal. They can make lots of clicks and sounds and humming and things like that. They're great with communicating with each other, and also cubs will like squeal and all that. Really, really cute. We know and love those little bears. So let's see if we can find the baby. There's got to be the baby in here somewhere. There you are, a little cutie. So typically, sows, female bears, will typically produce their first litter about 3 to 5 years of age, and usually in more developed areas they will get pregnant younger. The breeding period is typically from June to July, though it can extend up to August in the northern parts of their range. Males will try to mate with several females, but large dominant ones will usually claim a female. And then the fertilized eggs will undergo delayed development and does not implant in the female's womb until November. Typically, gestation period lasts 235 days, and litters are usually born in late January to early February, with litter size being between 1 to 6 cubs, so typically 2 to 3 is the most average. At birth, they only weigh between 280 to 450 grams, or about just under a pound, and about 20 centimeters long. They're born with fine grey down-like hair, and then they will develop, they'll open their eyes at about 40 days and begin walking at 5 weeks. Cubs are usually dependent on their mother's milk for about 30 weeks of age, and they will reach independence about 6 to 18 months. And at 6 weeks, they'll attain like 900 grams by 8 weeks and reach 2.5 kilos by 8 weeks. And then 6 months, they'll be about 27 kilograms. And then they reach sexual maturity at about 3 years of age, and they reach their full adult size at about 5 years of age. So the average lifespan for a wild one, because lots of baby bears die, is about 18 years, though quite possible for wild individuals to survive up to 23 years. And next year, a record of individual in the wild living 39 years and one in captivity living 44 years. But it typically just depends. With the exception of the rare confrontation with brown bears or grey wolves, they typically do quite well. There's not really much that hunts them, and they don't do that much hunting, so they're kind of the middle. And they do hibernate, so that's another way that protects them. They kind of slow their body down and things like that. Typical bear things. In terms of their diet, they're very much omnivores. They pretty much eat everything. They'll eat salmon, lots of fish, berries, and grasses, things like that, and all scavenge carrion. They'll feed a lot of honey. So they're very, very generalist. And they've been known to rarely attack deers, and even they've been up to adult female moose. But that's pretty rare. So depending on where they are, they'll just pretty much eat what they can find. So very, very generalist. Humans have a very interesting relationship with them. Indigenous people can kind of have stories about them. There's been attacks. American black bears typically avoid humans, but there can sometimes be attacks, and because they're attracted to people leaving their food out in the rubbish. So you got to be very, very careful with that. People hunt them as well and apparently eat them. Their meat is quite good, apparently, but they're luckily doing quite well. They are considered least concerned, so they're not doing too bad. And I got to say, Doc did a great job with the skin here. The light one, spirit bear one, looks really, really nice. So you all did a wonderful job, I will be honest. Really, really cool. So that was done by Genora Pizza, Leaf, Gaboy, and Doc589. All did a wonderful job remastering that bear. So next up, last but certainly not least, we've got another one. So this is a not Zoo Tycoon, a Jurassic World Evolution 2 modder that's managed to come in. Gushi Gore, if you remember Gushi, is coming in to do some modding, and with the help from Lethal Monsoon, has created the Secretary Bird. I'm pretty sure we've covered it before, but now we've got a Secretary Bird mod, so this is really, really awesome. So Secretary Bird is a really large, mostly terrestrial bird of prey that's only found in Africa. It's typically found only in open grasslands and savannas, which is really interesting. So in terms of its relationship with other birds, it's actually closely related to like New World vultures, so like condors and things like that, and also ospreys. So it's very interesting where it places on the family tree. They're really, really basal, and it's just really, really cool. Everyone was like wondering why the heck did it look like that. There seems to be some fossils that have outclared that a bit, where they kind of look like the same and thought to be the same genus, and the same family. So this is the only living member of the family Cytaridae, which has secretary birds and their extinct relatives. So their scientific name, I'm trying to figure out what it means. So their most scientific name is Latin for archer, so archer, and then the species name is snake, so they're snake archer or serpent archer, because these guys eat a lot of snakes. But luckily we've managed to figure out their evolutionary relationships. So they're quite instantly recognizable, like you can't mistake secretary bird for pretty much anything else, maybe a Seriuma, but they live in South America. They are quite large. They have an eagle-like body and the body of a crane. They can stand up to about 1.3 meters or about just over 4 feet tall, and they can get to a body length between 1.1 to 1.5 meters or about 3 foot to 4 foot 11 or about 5 feet. They have a wingspan of about 1.9 to 2.1 meters or about 6 foot 3 to 6 foot 11, and weigh between 3.7 to 4.2 kilograms or 8 to 9 pounds with an average weight of about 4 kilograms, which is really interesting. They also have, you can see these really, really long legs, and they don't have an especially long neck, but they've got those really long legs. So during flight, they do have 2 elongated feathers that come out behind the tail, and their neck is stretched out like a stalk. The orcas, you can see they've got the very much interesting like coma feathers down their back, and they've got a wedge-shaped tail and all that. Sexes typically tend to look very much like one another, though typically the differences between the males tend to have longer tail feathers, more head plumes. These are called plumes. Males tend to be a little bit more shorter head and more bluish grey plumage. And it also, as you can see, you have this featherless red-orange face with the pale iris on them and the black feathers. And their toes are actually quite short, about 20% of the length of the eagle, but quite stout, which is very interesting. And typically babies will be a little bit yellowish in colour. Interesting as well. They're normally silent as well, but they can make a deep guttural croaking noise in nests or things like that. But other than that, typically silent. But in terms of their habitat, as I mentioned, they live around sub-Saharan Africa and not very migratory. They tend to be locally nomadic and follow rainfall and prey abundance. But their range also extends to Senegal and Somalia and west and down into South Africa. They've been found in all sorts of habitats, but they do prefer open habitats, a variety of elevations. They like scrub and things like that rather than forests. And most prefer areas of water that of grass that are actually under a foot tall, though they avoid areas with grass over a meter tall. So in terms of their behavior, they're not gregarious other than their pairs and their offspring, and they usually roost in trees like acacia trees, even introduced pine trees in South Africa. They set off about 1 to 2 hours after dawn and generally spend some time preening. Mating pairs will actually roost together, but they may forage separately, often remaining inside of one another. And they pace at around 3 kilometers an hour, taking 120 steps per minute. And after spending much of the day on the ground, they return moving downwind. And birds if encountered singly are often unattached. Conversely, larger groups of up to 50 have been seen around like water holes or fires as animals try to escape. They'll tend to take advantage. They're also quite good at soaring. They use their primary feathers to maintain turbulence, and they can flap their wings, so it's quite laborious, and they typically ride thermals. And in terms of their lifespan, they've been known to live about 10 to 15 years in the wild, with the oldest confirmed by banding to be 5 years old. Was kind of nest banded in 2011. And then recovered 440 miles away, or 440 kilometers away, 270 miles away, and lived up to June 2016, and up to about 18 years of captivity, which is quite interesting. So in terms of breeding, as I mentioned, they form monogamous pairs. We'll have a look at the cute little babies. They form monogamous pairs and defend a large territory that can be about 50 kilometers or about 19 square miles and can breed any time of the year, but most frequently they like to breed during the dry season. And during courtship, they'll have all sorts of displays, such as these quadrille croak rings. They'll kind of soar high up in the sky, things like that. They also perform ground displays by chasing each other with the wings, which also uses a way to defend their territory. And then they will mate either in the ground or in the trees. The nest is typically built by both sexes at the top of a densely thorny tree, usually acacia, between 2.5 to 13 meters or about 8 to 40 feet tall. And they typically make these thick platforms between 1 to 1.5 meters or about 3 to 5 feet across, with a depth of about 30 to 50 centimeters, which is lined with grass and occasionally dung. So typically eggs are laid at about 2 to 3 day intervals until they laid all their eggs. And they hatch after about 45 days at an interval of about 2 to 3 days. Both parents will feed the young by regurgitating, and then once for the first 2 to 3 weeks of life, they will stay in the nest. And until under favorable conditions, they're typically all 3 eggs will fledge, but food is often more scarce, and 1 or more of the chicks will die of starvation. And plus, the young can be prey for animals such as hornbills, large owls, crows, and ravens. Typically, the young are born with a grey-white down like this and have it for 2 weeks. They have bare skin and like yellow legs, and then they will be able to get their flight feathers and crest feathers at 21 to 28 days. And then they begin to start feeding for themselves about 40 days, and then at 60 days they are fully feathered and can flap their wings. Their weight will change. They'll typically be 56 grams or 2 ounces as a hatchling, and by 3 kilos about 70 days of age, 70 days, which is cool. And they typically will leave the nest about 65 to 106 days of age, which is typically, although it's most typical, between 75 to 80 days of age they'll leave. And the juveniles will remain near their natal range, or where they were born, until they're between 4 to 7 months of age. And then usually their first breed is about 2 years and 9 months, which is actually quite young for a raptor that size. But in terms of feeding, these guys are very interesting predators. So unlike most birds of prey, the secretary bird is actually largely terrestrial, so they will hunt in loose groups or flocks and stride. They typically prey on insects, but small vertebrates as well. They've been typically known to hunt rodents, frogs, small tortoises, lizards, and birds like small hornbills, bills, chickens, doves, larks, and warblers. They've also been known to hunt on some bigger animals, so that's such as hedgehogs, mongoose, small felids, like even cheetah cubs, which is interesting, striped polecats, young gazelles, and hares. And they're also been quite important for snake control, so they eat a lot of snakes. They eat a lot of adders and cobras, which are venomous, which is very interesting. And how they do that is they typically flush prey from tall grass and stomp it, and their crest feathers may be raised, and they'll find that, and then kind of strike blows. They just kick it to death pretty much, which is pretty interesting. And we actually have a pretty good idea of what they eat because of they drop pellets, because they can't digest bones and things. So they have a relatively short digestive tract in comparison to birds like the Kori buzzard, and so they're well adapted to eating meat, and then they'll leave a pellet, very similar to like how owls will. And they specialize quite well. That's why part of the reason they have such short feet and long legs. They pretty much stomp their prey until it's immobilized or killed. And they usually do that with snakes or lizards. And they've actually been seen, if you often see videos with a rubber snake, they just crush it to death or stomp it to death. It's actually been suggested that this was a strategy that terror birds would have used, even though they aren't closely related. They are very anatomically similar. And they really encounter other predators, though, except in the case of tawny eagles that will steal their prey. It's quite interesting. But in terms of cultural significance, they've been highly admired around Africa because of their striking appearance, and they deal with pests and snakes, so that people kind of like them. They've been used. The emblem of Sudan has the secretary bird. The Maasai people call them the one arrow as the crest feathers. They've been used in traditional medicines, things like that. And in terms of conservation, they are considered endangered, sadly, as we'll get into. As I mentioned, they are considered for medicine, but they're vulnerable because of rapid declines. The estimated population is believed to be about 6,000 to 6,700 to 67,000, but long-term monitoring has suggested that populations have declined with the increase of bush encroachments and tall vegetation cover, losing that open habitat. But as a population, they're mostly threatened by loss of habitat due to fragmentation by roads and overgrazing by livestock. but also, like as I mentioned, medicine is a big thing as well. It's just loss of habitat, which is really important for these guys. But luckily, they have been reared in captivity. The first actually rearing of a secretary bird was done in 1986 in Oklahoma City Zoo. And though they're normally in the wild, they'll nest in trees. In captivity, they will nest on the ground, which is left open to depopulate by local mammals. And to address this problem, zoos actually removed eggs from the nest each time they were laid so they can incubate in a safer location. And then the species have been bred and reared in captivity at places like the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. So yeah, another really, really cool one. So nice Gushy. It's nice to see Gushy in Planet Zoo doing a wonderful job, and started off with a really, really awesome bird. It's really cool to talk about them. I'm pretty sure I've covered them before, but I don't recall a secretary bird mod. I'm pretty sure I have covered them before though. But still really, really awesome to get one that's really, really nice. And also thanks Monsoon and Leaf for helping out. And we're getting a Jurassic World modder in Planet Zoo, so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the future with a lot of these mods. So yeah, I'm going to pull out. So yeah, this has been a really awesome episode. Thank you for Phonetic and Leaf and Scott and Rawalla and Genora Pizza and everyone that did a really great job, especially Gushy Gore and a new modder from Jurassic World Evolution 2 into Planet Zoo. We hope you have a good time here. Making some really cool animals, starting off with the secretary bird. It's definitely starting off strong. But yeah, I hope you guys really, really, really enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to click the little bell icons to get notified below anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, I hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.